The anonymous letter about my husband changed everything. I left and never looked back. The letter arrived without a return address. A few quiet sentences exposing a side of my husband I had never imagined. At first, I wanted to deny it. But piece by piece, the truth surfaced, unraveling the life I thought we had built. There was no dramatic confrontation, no final argument, just clarity. I packed what mattered most, walked away, and chose peace over explanations. Some truths don't ask for forgiveness. They demand distance. If this story helps you recognize when the truth gives you permission to leave, please leave a like and subscribe. There are revelations that arrive not with thunder, but with the quiet rustling of paper slipped through a mail slot. Truths delivered by strangers that shatter carefully constructed realities in the time it takes to read a few sentences. The anonymous letter about my husband arrived on a Tuesday morning in March. Plain white envelope with no return address. My name written in unfamiliar handwriting. Contents that would dismantle my 8-year marriage in the span of 2 paragraphs. I didn't confront my husband immediately or demand explanations or create the dramatic scenes that often accompany the end of relationships. Instead, I quietly verified what the letter claimed. Discovered that the stranger who'd sent it had given me a gift of truth I couldn't have accessed on my own, and left with nothing but what I could carry and a clarity about who my husband actually was that made looking back impossible. My name is Catherine Moore, and I'm 35 years old. I'd been married to my husband James for 8 years when the letter arrived, 8 years during which I'd believed we had a solid, if not passionate marriage, a functional partnership built on compatible life goals and mutual respect, if not on intense romance or deep emotional intimacy. James worked in commercial real estate development, had built successful career that provided comfortable upper-middle-class lifestyle. I worked as a grant writer for nonprofit organizations, career that was meaningful to me even if the salary was modest compared to James's income. We lived in a nice house in a good neighborhood, maintained active social lives with separate friend groups that occasionally overlapped, presented as successful professional couple to the world around us. Our marriage wasn't perfect. We'd fallen into patterns where we lived somewhat parallel lives, where we coordinated logistics efficiently but didn't necessarily connect deeply emotionally, where we were good at being partners in running a household but less good at being intimate companions who shared inner lives. But I'd believed the foundation was solid, that whatever limitations our relationship had were normal for long-term marriages, that the compatibility and stability we'd built were valuable, even if they weren't particularly exciting or romantic. I'd never suspected James of infidelity or deception, had trusted that the life we were living together was built on honesty and mutual commitment, even if it wasn't built on passion. The letter that arrived that Tuesday morning was typed, professional-looking, addressed to me personally. When I opened it, expecting perhaps something work-related or some kind of official notification, I found instead 2 short paragraphs that would change everything. Mrs. Moore, you don't know me, but I know something about your husband that you deserve to know. James has been in a relationship with a man named David Chen for approximately 3 years. They meet regularly at David's apartment and at hotels when traveling for work. Your husband is living a double life, presenting as straight and married, while maintaining a long-term relationship with a man. You deserve to know the truth about who you're married to so you can make informed choices about your own life. My first reaction was disbelief and dismissal. This had to be a mistake or a malicious prank, someone trying to cause problems in my marriage for reasons I couldn't fathom. James wasn't gay. He'd never given me any indication of attraction to men. We'd had a functional, if not passionate, sexual relationship throughout our marriage. Nothing about his behavior had suggested he was anything other than the heterosexual man I'd always believed him to be. The letter had to be wrong or deliberately false, designed to create doubt and conflict where none legitimately existed. But even as I tried to dismiss the letter, details started surfacing in my memory that suddenly seemed significant in new light. James's business trips had become more frequent over the past few years, and he'd become more protective of his schedule and his phone during that same period. He'd joined a gym about 3 years ago, exactly the timeline the letter mentioned, and spent several hours there multiple times per week, far more time than seemed necessary just for fitness. Our sexual relationship had declined significantly over the past 2 or 3 years. with James often claiming exhaustion or stress when I initiated intimacy. He'd become more particular about his appearance and clothing, had started using cologne and skincare products that seemed more elaborate than his previous simple routine. None of these things had seemed suspicious at the time. They'd all had plausible explanations that I'd accepted without question. But now, with the letter's claims creating new framework for interpretation, the pattern started looking less like normal life changes and more like someone maintaining a secret relationship that required time, attention, and the kind of physical self-care you engage in when you're trying to be attractive to someone new. I decided I needed to verify the letter's claims before confronting James, needed to know whether this was malicious fiction or actual truth before taking any action. I hired a private investigator, explained the situation and what the letter had claimed, asked for surveillance that would either confirm or disprove that James was involved with someone named David Chen. The investigator found David Chen quickly. He was a man in his early 30s who worked in architecture, lived in an apartment building about 20 minutes from our house, had no apparent connection to James through work or social circles that would explain legitimate non-romantic contact. The investigator conducted surveillance for 10 days, following James during times when he'd told me he was going to the gym or running errands or working late. What the surveillance documented confirmed everything the anonymous letter had claimed. James went to David's apartment multiple times during those 10 days, stayed for several hours each visit, behaved physically affectionate with David in ways that were clearly romantic rather than platonic, kissing goodbye, holding hands, body language that communicated intimate partnership rather than friendship or professional relationship. The investigator also obtained photographs of James and David together at restaurants and hotels, documented that they'd traveled together for a weekend trip to Portland that had occurred during time when James told me he was at a business conference. The evidence was comprehensive and undeniable. James was having a relationship with David Chen, had been involved with him for years based on the apparent comfort and established patterns of their interactions, was maintaining an entire dimension of his life that I'd known nothing about. I sat in my car in a parking lot reading the investigator's report, looking at photographs of my husband being affectionate with another man, processing that my 8-year marriage was built on a foundation I hadn't understood. James wasn't just cheating. He was apparently gay or bisexual, living a double life where he presented as straight married man while actually being in a long-term relationship with a man. The deception wasn't just about infidelity, but about fundamental dishonesty about his identity and desires, about building a life with me while apparently wanting or needing something completely different that he'd chosen to pursue secretly rather than honestly. I felt a strange mixture of emotions as I processed this information. Hurt and betrayal, certainly. Discovering your spouse has been systematically lying to you and cheating on you for years is devastating regardless of the specific circumstances. But also a kind of sad understanding that James had apparently felt he couldn't be honest about his sexuality, had chosen heterosexual marriage that might have been more about social expectations or self-protection than about genuine desire to be with me specifically. And underlying everything was a profound clarity that this marriage was over, that there was no path forward from this kind of comprehensive deception and double life, that the only appropriate response was to leave and build a life built on truth rather than continuing in relationship founded on lies. I spent 3 days preparing to leave before confronting James. I consulted with a divorce attorney about my rights and options, began documenting marital assets and protecting my financial interests. I found a short-term rental apartment and arranged to move there immediately. I told close friends what I'd discovered so I'd have support system in place. I packed essential belongings and important documents, prepared to take what I could carry and leave the rest behind, rather than engaging in prolonged negotiation over possessions. When I finally confronted James, I did it calmly and directly without drama or extended discussion. He came home from the gym, which I now knew meant from David's apartment, on a Friday evening to find me sitting in our living room with my bags packed and the investigator's report laid out on the coffee table. "I know about David," I said simply. "I have comprehensive documentation of your relationship with him over the past 3 years. I know you've been lying to me about fundamental aspects of who you are and what you want. I've consulted with a divorce attorney. I've found an apartment, and I'm leaving tonight. I'm not here to discuss or negotiate or listen to explanations. I'm here to tell you it's over and to get my things. James's face went through several expressions. Shock that I'd discovered his secret, fear about what this meant for his carefully compartmentalized life, calculation about whether denial or confession or some other response would serve him better. "Catherine, please let me explain," he started, but I held up my hand to stop him. "I don't need explanations," I said. "Whether you're gay or bisexual, whether your marriage to me was ever genuine or was always some kind of cover, whether you think you can justify lying to me for years while maintaining a relationship with someone else, none of that matters now. What matters is that you built our entire marriage on deception, that I can't trust anything you've said or done over 8 years, that the foundation of our life together was false. There's no coming back from that. The only path forward is separation." James tried several approaches over the next hour as I loaded my car with my belongings, minimizing. His relationship with David wasn't serious. It didn't change how he felt about me. Justifying. He'd been confused about his sexuality, hadn't wanted to hurt me by being honest. Pleading. We could work through this, go to counseling, find some way to preserve our marriage. But I'd already made my decision and was committed to it. I finished loading my car, left my house keys on the kitchen counter, and drove away from the house and the marriage without looking back. The divorce process took 11 months to finalize. James tried initially to contest it, suggested we attempt reconciliation or counseling, seemed genuinely surprised that I was unwilling to consider any option other than immediate permanent separation. But I remained firm in my position. The deception had been too comprehensive, the foundation too false, the trust too destroyed to repair. The final settlement divided our assets relatively equitably. I kept my retirement accounts and personal belongings. We sold the house and split the proceeds. Neither of us sought spousal support given that we both had professional careers and independent incomes. Through mutual friends, I learned some details about James's situation after our separation. He initially continued his relationship with David, but that apparently fell apart within a few months. David had apparently believed James was planning to leave his marriage and come out, was upset to discover James had been maintaining the deception for years with no actual plan to be honest, ended the relationship rather than continue being someone's secret. James eventually came out to his family and close friends as bisexual, started dating men openly rather than secretly, built a life that was more honest, even if it had required the destruction of his marriage to reach that point. I also learned eventually who had sent the anonymous letter, though not through any deliberate investigation. About a year after my divorce finalized, I received another letter, this time with a return address and signature. It was from David Chen, the man James had been involved with. The letter was an apology of sorts. "Mrs. Moore, I'm writing to apologize for the pain my relationship with your husband caused you, and to explain why I sent the anonymous letter that I assume you received. I was involved with James for 3 years, and for most of that time I believed he was planning to eventually leave his marriage and be honest about his sexuality. But as time passed, I realized James had no intention of ever being honest with you or coming out publicly, that he was comfortable maintaining indefinite deception and double life. I struggled with whether to tell you because I knew it would hurt you and destroy your marriage. But eventually I decided you deserved to know the truth about who you were married to so you could make informed choices about your own life. I'm sorry for the role I played in deceiving you, and I'm glad that at least the information I provided allowed you to leave a situation built on lies." Reading David's letter, I felt complicated mixture of emotions. Anger that he'd participated in deceiving me for 3 years before developing conscience about it. Gratitude that he'd eventually chosen to give me information I couldn't have accessed without his intervention. Sadness about the whole situation. About James's inability to be honest. About my 8 years in a marriage built on deception I'd been unable to detect. About the pain that dishonesty had caused everyone involved. But overwhelmingly, what I felt was clarity and peace about the choice I'd made to leave. The anonymous letter had given me truth I desperately needed. And that truth had given me permission and motivation to walk away from a life that had been fundamentally dishonest. I hadn't needed dramatic confrontation or extended explanations or attempts at reconciliation. I'd needed information, verification, and the clarity to act decisively based on that information. And that's exactly what the letter had provided. 3 years after receiving the anonymous letter, and 2 years after my divorce finalized, I'm 35 and rebuilt into a life that's simpler but more authentic than what I had during my marriage. I live alone in a modest apartment, have rebuilt my social life and my sense of self outside the context of being married, have learned to value truth and authenticity over the kind of surface stability that my marriage had provided. I've dated some but haven't pursued anything serious. Am still processing what it means that I spent 8 years married to someone who was fundamentally dishonest about who he was and what he wanted. I think often about the anonymous letter and about how profoundly it changed my life. Without that intervention by a stranger, David Chen, who'd eventually developed enough conscience to give me information, even though doing so destroyed his own relationship with James, I might still be living in that marriage, might have continued for years or decades without knowing the truth, might have wasted more of my life in a relationship built on comprehensive deception. The letter was a gift, however painful the truth it delivered was, because it gave me information I needed to make informed choices about my own life. I also think about James and what his situation reveals about the costs of dishonesty and living inauthentically. He'd apparently felt unable to be honest about his sexuality, had chosen heterosexual marriage that might have been more about meeting social expectations or maintaining appearances than about genuine desire to be with me specifically. His inability or unwillingness to be honest had damaged everyone involved. Me, him, David, potentially other people in his life who'd been deceived by his performance of heterosexual normalcy. And ultimately, his deception had cost him everything he'd been trying to protect by lying. His marriage, his relationship with David, his privacy about his sexuality, his reputation for integrity. What I learned from the anonymous letter, and everything that followed, is that some truths don't ask for forgiveness or explanation. They demand distance and clean separation. When I discovered James had been maintaining a double life for years, there was no path to reconciliation that would have been healthy or sustainable. The only appropriate response was to leave completely, to choose peace and truth over attempting to salvage something built on such comprehensive dishonesty. The letter gave me clarity and permission to make that choice, to walk away without the guilt or second-guessing that might have kept me trapped in trying to save something that had never been real in the first place. My name is Catherine Moore. An anonymous letter told me my husband had been in a relationship with a man for 3 years, was living a double life I'd known nothing about. I verified the claims, discovered they were completely true, left within days of confirming the deception. There was no dramatic confrontation, no extended attempts at explanation or reconciliation, just clarity about what the truth demanded. I packed what mattered, walked away from a marriage built on lies, and chose peace over explanations. Some truths don't ask for forgiveness, they demand distance. And that distance, however painful initially, gave me back something I'd been living without for 8 years, a life built on truth and authenticity, rather than on deception I couldn't see through without help from a stranger who cared enough to tell me what I deserved to know. Thank you for reading. If this story helped you recognize when the truth gives you permission to leave, please like and subscribe.